What happens when a teenage dream collides with a father's quiet love? And the backdrop is every single football ground in the country. Giles Goford was just 14 when he set out on a mission to visit all 92 Football League stadiums across England and Wales. But he wasn't alone. His dad, who wasn't even a football fan, came along for the ride, and what began as a football journey became something much deeper. But this wasn't just a feel-good father-son road trip. Alongside the magic of match days came the darker side of 1980s football. Hooliganism, racism, and fear. For a young boy, the stands weren't always a safe place, and what he witnessed would shape him in unexpected ways. How did those travels, those thousands of miles, and those raw moments change him? And how did they lead him to a career behind some of the biggest shows in sport, including Match of the Day and writing a heartfelt memoir, Head for the Floodlights? This is a story of dreams, danger, and deep connection, and it's shared here on a podcast for the very first time. Giles Goford. So, what's your story? There's something much deeper than just the book here, isn't there? I'm interested in, of course, the journey around the 92, but tell us about your younger years, Giles. Tell us about sort of, what was going on, because also it helps us understand what age you were at this time of this wonderful adventure.
Indeed. Well, yeah, we'll come on to the late 80s in a minute, but let's maybe go back to the early 80s. And probably ever since I can remember, football has been part of my life. And that's not because of my dad or my mum or any of my family, because none of them were interested whatsoever in football.
Wow.
But it's one of those moments, and maybe a life-changing moment, where the FA Cup final was on. It was May 1980. It was a beautiful sunny day.
Wow.
I was playing in the garden, and for some reason the telly was on. And I don't know why, because my dad would not have been watching the football. But that's
this was back in the day where it was terrestrial TV. It wasn't Sky, and they used to televise all of the big games, didn't they?
That's right. And the football coverage of the FA Cup final started at 9 a.m. and carried on probably till 9 p.m.
I remember
a national event. So this was 1980. I was just nearly 7 years old. And I remember walking in through the double doors. We lived in Cheshire Boys in Buckinghamshire. I remember that day very well. And seeing this thing that I didn't really know what it was on the telly. And suddenly it was like I was transfixed. And I don't think I'd seen any football before.
Who was playing? Can you remember?
It was West Ham against Arsenal. Wow. It was West Ham won 1-0. And some might think, that instantly made you a West Ham fan. Well, it certainly didn't. but I just loved seeing what was on the screen. And honestly, I was transfixed and remember sitting, right in front of the TV watching this thing. And then that's the day my life changed. Yeah, it really was, because as soon as that sort of match was over, I remember saying to Dad, who may or may not have joined me to watch it, I can't remember. I was like, Dad, what is this? I want some more of this. When's the next match on? And are there any, clubs like this local to us? And all these sort of questions I had instantly.
Wow.
So I was, I was a kid who was fascinated by geography and colours and countries and maps and place names and all those kind of stuff, So football, again, was just an extension of that. And then I wanted to know everything about football immediately, And in a way that leads us to the 92, because 92 is like an iconic number in football, because since maybe the 1950s, there have been 92 league grounds, and to go to them and to see matches at every one is sort of a badge of honour for many people.
And you're going to grounds in the 80s which are no longer there.
That's right.
Me sitting here with my Leicester City mug whilst I'm recording this, I'm a Leicester fan. So, for me at that time, it was Filbert Street. Filbert Street doesn't exist anymore. It's the King Power. And there's so many examples of that in your book, isn't there? Where, you've got this beautiful photographic as well as literary journey of what's going on, but they're not there anymore. No. And it was very different then, wasn't it?
Yeah. Over a third of the grounds of those 92 on the trip we went to in the late 80s, they don't exist anymore. As you say, Filbert Street being one example. They're either housing estates, they're supermarkets. There's only one of the grounds that we went to which still exists that doesn't host football anymore, league football, and that's Rotherham United. So the old ground is still there, Millmoor, and you can see it from the new stadium.
Wow.
And I went there a few months ago just because it was one of the only ones that was still around, and it was like going back in time. But we can come on to that a bit later. But yeah, so no, my football love started that day. It carried on through the 80s until the time where in 1988, Dad and I decided to do this journey.
It's not unfair of me to say that as a child you were quite shy.
I was shy. I was not confident in many things. I wasn't great academically. There were certain things that I loved, and I liked writing, and I loved geography. But when it came to subjects like maths and science, I really, really struggled, to the point where at one point, Ian, I remember it being at school and we had a physics test, and they published the list of the results of this physics test on the school notice board. 150 kids in my year. I was 149th. Ooh. And I remember thinking, well, at least I haven't come last. And I looked at who was in...
That's optimistic viewing.
Yeah. And I looked at who was 150th, and it was a friend of mine called Simon, and it said absent because he didn't actually take the exam. God. So I was last.
So you were last.
And those sort of things don't make you feel very confident at school. And that was just, that was physics. I was okay at other subjects, but certainly not a sort of natural academic, unlike my father, who was very intelligent, went to Oxford, studied maths. And also all through my life, I felt like, a bit of an underachiever compared to him.
Did you feel sometimes that you were almost in his shadow? You describe your father so affectionately in so many examples, but one of the things you say is he never wasted a word. I love that, because it's kind of like, but it sort of says a lot about the man, even though you don't know him. And he was very, very bright, very well respected. A gentleman, I think it's fair to say, but not wasting a word. Did you feel almost as if sometimes you were, dare I say, not good enough, or in his shadow?
I did feel that for many, many years, and certainly academically. And the one thing I would say about Dad then, he never put any pressure on me to be.
Right.
Let's say.
So this is your imposed,
self-imposed. No, because I knew what he studied, gone on to be in his career, very successful. And I thought, well, where am I going to be successful? How am I going to be successful? Because I know I've not got this sort of natural intelligence maybe that he had, and also very hardworking as well.
Because you looked up to him, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I did.
Like most of us look up to our father, don't we?
Yeah.
One way or another, there's something they have that we want as a child, because we want to be that man. Yeah.
We want to be protected, and we want to be loved, and we want to be treated, and all those sort of things. And he did that. He was a very, very loving father, but he was also a workaholic. He was in London a lot and traveling abroad a lot, and I was sort of quite envious of that, thinking, well, I'd like some time with you, which is where football came in, because I made sure that in the early 80s, we went to see Watford every other week. We had a season ticket at Watford for a season, just for one season.
Did you?
Yeah, one. It was a glorious season because Watford got promoted to the top flight for the first time ever. So it was actually really iconic being there.
There you go.
And that was our time. And obviously we had family time. We did family holidays, but Dad was away a lot. So that was very, very special time to me. We were watching football. That was on my terms, right? So I said, Dad, let's go and watch Watford. He was like, okay. And we got to love that. And then through that, that's where things like, the trip sort of came around.
Yeah, because your dad, as we said in the intro, or maybe we didn't skip that, but I think you mentioned it, he wasn't a football fan. He was not a football fan. So help us to understand how it came about, how the decision came about, because it was a joint decision. Yeah, your dad was in. He was going to do this.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, he was a bit like me. We were both sort of completists. If we were going to do one ground, you might as well do all 92.
Yeah, we're not going to do 4 or 5. We're going to go 92.
We're going to do all 92.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. He wasn't a football fan. He grew up in Portsmouth. He knew vaguely a little bit about Portsmouth Football Club, but his first match was my first match. So in a way, we discovered football together, and I love that.
Yeah.
That we were both on a journey together.
Yeah.
So the trip came about. So we were probably looking at about early 1988, and I was at that awkward teenage, bit grumpy, not doing well at school.
Yeah.
And I think I was like, Dad, feel like something's missing. It's great going to Watford and it's great going to a few games in London, but I've never been to Manchester. I've never been to Liverpool, Newcastle, Rotherham, Middlesbrough. I want to go and see those places. And pretty much it was like, okay, yeah, well, let's go and do it.
Because your dad had a sense of adventure that was in him, wasn't it? But it's also important to state here, you didn't watch a game at every ground.
No, we didn't. No, I would love to, but that would have taken years and years.
Absolutely.
And so Dad just wouldn't have been able to do it, with work and the travel and cost of it. So that was fine. I accepted that, and I had been to about 6 or 7 different grounds by then. But I wanted to look further afield, and I wanted to see the Rochdales and the Exeters, as well as Manchester United and Liverpool. They meant just as much to me because I was obsessed by football. I'd read all the magazines, I'd watch the TV, and I was sort of these players were my role models, my heroes. Yeah. And I wanted to sort of get that connection with them and see where they played and see where all the fans flocked to every week.
And let's mention this if we can. I'd like to bring this up now if we can. Back in the 80s, football had a bit of a reputation. In fact, it had quite a bad reputation at some points. It was highlighted for hooliganism, racism. There was a lot of things going on that a young child or youngish teenager even were a little bit, were the points in the adventure, let's keep calling it that because I think it is, that you felt, oh my goodness me. And what was your father like in that environment? Because you mentioned to me you were at Chelsea or you were there, were you?
It was at Portsmouth,
Was it when they were ripping the seats out?
Yeah, that's right. And that would have been in about 1984. And I think the reason we went to some of these matches, because probably Dad was quite naive in his own, because he had not been to football, so he didn't know the football culture. Right. You probably don't take your 10-year-old son to Portsmouth against Chelsea on a Tuesday night in the 80s.
And did it all kick off?
It did all kick off, yeah. Right. And I remember it very well. And it was both sets of fans. I'm not apportioning blame. It was just one of those where, seats were being ripped up, thrown across the pitch. We scuttled out the ground. Jesus. You're half thinking, just get me out of here. Yeah. But I'm also kind of looking after my dad in a way, because again, he's unaware of this. He would have been aware of it in the news, but you have to be there to really understand who to avoid, what side streets to not go down, all those kind of things. There were a couple of instances like that. I must say I was lucky in the sense that I went to Watford when I was young, and Watford had a fantastic family environment, very little trouble at Vicarage Road. And so that was a really nice introduction to football. But as you go further afield, of course, you do come across certain instances that you wish you hadn't been there, involving different clubs, different fans. So it didn't stop us wanting to go on this trip. Obviously, we weren't going to matches at every ground. We did go to a few matches on the trip. But you just have to learn to be a bit savvy and what kind of people to avoid.
No, absolutely. And, there is a contrast, isn't there, between football then and football now. It was some of the pitches were a bit uneven. The players weren't earning astronomical money that they do now. There was no VAR. Can you? I mean, some people are going VAR. Some people are going no, But what's your memories of football then to now, Giles? And I know that's quite an expansive question almost, because there's merits back then and there's merits now, isn't there?
Yeah, and people from certain generations some might look back and go, oh, football was way better in the 80s. And it probably wasn't, and the experience of going but of course that's your life.
Some real characters, wasn't there, as well?
Incredible characters.
Both managers and players.
And clubs were run on absolute shoestrings. The manager wouldn't just be the football manager. They would clean the stadium up after the ground. You'd probably have staffs of about 5 or 6 people at a major football club. It really wasn't the game it was today. I mean, it can be a bit of a sanitized experience now, especially at the bigger stadiums. And if you want to pay for tunnel clubs and all that kind of stuff, that's not my thing. So I would much prefer to go to a smaller, even a non-league team, and I do down at Macclesfield. And I love that experience because you're close to the pitch. You know the players a little bit. You see the regular fans. So those sort of things mean a lot to me. Very different experience back now. I think, as I say, it's the experience is so different to back then. The fact you could go to any ground on a Saturday and just buy a ticket and walk in. So we used to go to Arsenal.
Yeah, you did, didn't you?
And Chelsea and Wimbledon, because we decided on the day that's where we were going. You couldn't do that now because you need to be a member. You need to buy a ticket. You'd need to this and that.
I hadn't even thought of that. That's madness.
That's life, and that's the way things have changed, and I totally accept that. But I did like the spontaneity of it back then. You could just decide to go anywhere on any given day.
I love that. Was there a favourite ground out of all of those 92? We're referring to back then, yeah. So was there a favourite? And I've got to follow up with which ground had the best pies?
There's some great pies. I think a favourite, let's take Ipswich aside for a minute because that's my love.
Because that's biased.
But we did have a really nice day there. I always say Villa Park is one of my favourite grounds.
Was it really?
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it really goes back to the sort of the forefathers of football and the way that ground is built. And it's a real community and it's a real sort of cathedral of football. And I've seen a few matches there and it's a great atmosphere. So I think Villa Park is an absolute classic. But then I'm a big fan of places like Boundary Park, Oldham, or, Spotland at Rochdale, St James's Park, Exeter, those kind of grounds, which just, again, they've been around for so long and they have such football history there. And so all those clubs will have their day in the sun and they will win promotions and they will get to FA Cup semi-finals. And they may only happen once in a generation, but those fans will cherish those moments.
Well, a little bit like Leicester City.
Exactly.
Winning the Premier League, 15-16 season, phenomenal. The
achievement of winning Premier League and the FA Cup in those years is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And most fans of clubs of that size would absolutely love to repeat.
Well, even the bookies got it wrong, didn't they? 5,000 to 1, I mean, come on.
No, it was a great season.
It was a great season.
Yeah.
Actually, I am going to be a little bit biased, everybody listening, because on the front cover of Giles's Head for the Floodlights around the 92 and the 1980, I noticed this when I kindly, we exchanged and you signed a book for me. I'm so proud of that. But Leicester City, Filbert Street is on one of the tiny little pictures on the front, and I'm like, wow. But there's some others there. There's Preston North End, there's Barnsley, there's Ipswich. You've got there Villa, you've mentioned, Blackpool, Watford. And a couple of others that I don't recognise.
Yeah. And I think the thing with those photos, although ironically, I think that picture of Leicester on the front is probably more to do with the fact the publishers are both Leicester fans as well. And fair play to we've had many chats about that. It was also my first proper away day at Filbert Street back in the 80s. But look at the cover and look at most of the photos in that. And every ground is different.
Yeah.
I love the lettering. I love the signage. I love the fact that, nowadays you can go to clubs and it can be a little bit bland and corporate.
Yeah.
But back then it was, quite homemade at times. A lot of clubs didn't have receptions. So, nowadays you'd go into a shiny reception and you'd ask to see, whoever, didn't exist.
No, they didn't. It was very, even the turnstiles, clunky.
For a groundsman's door. I love that element of it. And that's what I remember and recall from those days is 92 different experiences.
Was it really?
That's what it was.
I can imagine it was. And was there a good pie at particularly one?
Oh, I think probably the northern grounds have better pies.
I always say
I'll say, probably a Blackburn or a Preston or a Rotherham.
I mean, obviously you perhaps don't know this, but I'm going to give a little bit of Leicester history here. So Pucker Pies was a family-owned Leicester business, and we were renowned for our pies. We had bloody good pies.
Yeah.
But there was something about coming to a northern ground, that was just that little bit different.
Yeah.
Chips and gravy, and
definitely.
It's like, come on. So, what do you think spending so much time with your dad, traveling around, taught you or gave you that you probably wouldn't have got? Because I'm imagining that a lot of the time he's in the car, you're up and down the motorway. Your dad, you said he's never wasted a word, but you're going to be chatting, aren't you? So do you think that gave you something that you wouldn't have got had you not have had this experience?
So. Yeah, no, I think so, because that was time for ourselves. And within the family unit that we had, I have a brother and a sister, and obviously my mum. And so, that's amongst 5, but this was just the 2 of us talking. And as I say, we were in the car for a long time, and he didn't waste a word. And it was that balance between my dad wanting to understand what I wanted to do with my life, but without the pressure of well, you've got to do well in this, you've got to do well in that. So he was very human about it, and he tried to find my strengths, but he was always pushing and probing and saying, well, have you thought about doing this course, or have you thought about, studying this? Or very much he wanted me to do well in life.
But he wanted you to make the choice.
He wanted me to make the choice. He would offer those kind of opportunities in life. I remember, once things like, we had a very early version of a home computer, and I had expressed interest in journalism. So I remember he went to buy a program called Fleet Street Editor, where you could make your own front page, as it were. And I remember thinking, that's really kind, because he wanted to think, could I do that?
Yeah.
Could I suddenly write my own headlines?
Yeah.
And things like that were pushing me towards what he thought I would be good at.
Yeah.
And I remember and respect that. And as it happened, I did move into journalism and TV production.
Yeah, you have. And it's, I read on the back of your book that it says, with his son at a time of personal difficulties. Are you okay sharing that?
Yeah. So we're talking about, the late 80s, and to not put a finer point in it, my parents were going through a difficult time, and they ended up, my dad left in the summer of 1989. So while the trip was still going on, because we did it in 3 different sections, and that was tough, because I knew it was coming.
Did you?
Yeah, I knew it was coming. I could feel it, and I knew it was coming. And not being able to do anything about it.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people talk about this, don't they? When the children are kept at the central point of, we stayed together because of the kids. I'm not a big believer in that. I'm going to just say that, and that might cause a bit of backlash, but to me, children are very, very intuitive. They know what's going on. And you've got 2 adults, which if they aren't where they used to be in their commitment with each other, often it is better for the family, or ironically, as well as, of course, the 2 individuals, which is the centric point of the decision, to separate.
Yeah. My dad did leave. My mum showed incredible strength throughout that time. They always maintained a very cordial relationship.
Good.
Up until, my dad died in 2017. My dad got remarried a couple of years later to an amazing woman called Jane. My mum is an amazing woman. And that was just the way life was. That's how the cards fell in our family. And as a 16-year-old, I certainly didn't want to start taking sides or apportioning any blame, or I wanted to maintain the relationship with my dad. And I was also living at home with my mum.
Wow.
So I found that balance tricky, and I did find it tricky. And that led to some behavior that I'm probably not that proud of, to be honest, because you're at that age where
it happens.
Things just come out, don't they?
Yeah,
and
absolutely. But you had this time back in the car with your dad.
Yes. So
of course,
we're talking about those sort of things.
Yeah, you are. Are you actually? Is he broaching the subject? Is he? Amongst other things, of course.
But again, he was not pushing me towards what his side effectively. No. He was very much a factual, logical person, and this is why this is happening.
But I can imagine for you that because potentially your world's being torn apart, the family unit's being torn apart, you've now got this nice bit of closeness with your father where it's just you and him, which, to be honest, Giles, you can't get, I told you my story about my time with my father, closeness when he was ill. And I really look back on those moments as magical, so precious.
Yeah.
Does that?
Absolutely. And I suppose that's why I wrote the book in many ways, because that was a really precious time. And even though we had a great relationship, moving forward through the 90s and onwards, I suppose that was always with other people. Yeah. We didn't ever probably have that specific time to ourselves for that length of time ever again. So that's probably why I sort of went back to it, and because it had the sort of football theme to it. That's why the book came about. So it is a football book, but it is very much a story of the 2 of us bonding and finding that love for each other, really.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And thinking about football, what did football teach you? Because it's an interesting thing, isn't it, football? It's societally, you've got all sorts of different people come into a match, races, sexes, age. There's a lot of things going on inside a football ground.
Yeah.
But it's also pre-football ground. It's the walk up to the stadium. It's that little, that little drink before or just that gathering of mates, Now you're with your dad, obviously. You're traveling around lots and lots of different grounds. They're not your home club. So, and going to a home match is very, very different for the home fan. But away is also exciting, yeah? But you're of an impressionable age. What impact do you now reflect back? I'm going to ask it two ways, actually, if I may. What do you think was happening then, and reflecting back, what do you think the impact of football has had on you as an individual?
Wow. Back then I was probably a bit overawed, to be honest.
Were you?
Yeah, I really was. And even meeting a player or a manager, and we met the Wigan manager.
Did you? You met a
guy called Brian Hamilton, who was there at Wigan to welcome us. Bizarrely,
really?
Yeah, he didn't know we were coming, but yeah, he happened to be there. But I was incredibly overawed and nervous and didn't know what to say. He was lovely, actually. And I spoke to him for the book, actually, because he's a former Ipswich player and former Leicester manager, indeed. But he was at Wigan at the time and happened to have his number, so I rang him. And we had another lovely chat about 36 years on. He didn't, of course, remember meeting me back then, but I remembered meeting him and we had a lovely, lovely chat. So things like that, getting close to a sport or a game I really, really loved was very, very important to me. Seeing these grounds, probably imagining I wish I'd been skillful enough to play on them.
Did you? Did you sometimes think that?
Yeah,
I think a lot. Yeah. I think a lot. Who doesn't? I think a lot of boys do, don't they?
Banging a goal.
Yeah, exactly.
Course, yeah. But I knew I would never be good enough to do that. But ironically, when I was 30, I did hire out Brentford's Griffin Park for a match because it was my one and only opportunity to play.
Did you?
I did. It cost me a fortune.
I bet it did. And you played, did you?
Yeah, picked the sides.
Did you?
We had a great time.
Oh,
yeah, we had a really good time. But one thing we did realise is how exhausting it is to play on a full-size pitch.
Yeah.
We were 30. We were relatively fit.
Yeah.
But within 10 minutes, we're all absolutely blowing because it's so difficult.
Again, let's just throw this in whilst we're there. Today it's a very controlled. Professional sportsmen now are very, very different to what they were in the 80s. I'll just say it like this because it helps me just articulate it better. There were occasions where, and Georgie Best is the most known example. And I know he wasn't in the 80s, but in the 80s it was still happening where they'd have a fag. And some of them would be turning up. Fag, by the way, cigarette, wherever you listen to in the world right now, I know fag means something else in America, for example. But cigarette before the match, and they'd maybe a bit hungover, perhaps haven't been training in the week, a few late nights at the nightclubs and stuff, That was happening, wasn't it?
Oh, very much so.
Some of the killer tackles as well that were going in.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
No, and that's the football I grew up on, and yeah, probably right. Some of the games I saw, the players were out in the nightclubs till 3 a.m, but it didn't really matter, the fact they could still score a goal or excite you with a bit of skill. So that didn't bother me. I didn't probably know at the time. But that was, again, one of the joys of writing the book is that I contacted over 70 players from that era.
Did you?
I tried, one from each club effectively, tried to get their thoughts and their memories of playing at grounds like Filbert Street or wherever. And that was a real joy to me because I was connecting with people who I watched at the time. I sort of idolised some of them. And then to talk to them in a sort of professional capacity and get their memories and thoughts was a lovely experience.
I love it.
I really enjoyed it.
I love it. And you mentioned earlier why the book, but let's just really drill on that one if we can. Why the book? Why?
I think the real catalyst, Ian, was that I was turning 50. And I wanted to do something for myself
it was like
that
a midlife
meant
crisis,
something.
Isn't that 40?
Like because of 50. So 30th, I'd hired Griffin Park.
Oh yeah,
right?
Hey, there's a pattern here.
40th,
every decade you do something.
Can't remember. Had a good party. 50th, what do I want to do for me? And my wife and I, we turned 50 in different years. So she had last year to do her thing, and she booked loads of things and had a great time.
Yeah, sure. So
2023 was my year for turning 50. What do I want to do?
Right.
And I posted a couple of the photos on a Facebook group, which is very much into former grounds.
Sure.
And the response was unbelievable. I mean, even if I'm posting pictures of Brighton's old ground, the Golston ground, and you'd have 100 comments going, well, I love being there, and I saw this game.
Sure. Yeah.
There's something in this.
Mm.
So I wrote the article for the BBC Sport website, which again had a great reaction. And then I thought, well, this could be a book, And I wanted to do something, and I had created a lot of content, and I have made documentaries and films, but I wanted to write a book, to not just be a consumer of life, but a creator in life.
I love that.
And that was when I contacted the publishers, and luckily they agreed.
Let's have a little shout out to publishers, because it's Conquer, sorry.
Yeah.
Conquer Publishing. And
Leicester-based, which
Leicester
you'll love.
Based, I love that. Of course.
Both Leicester fans.
Yeah. Some good things do come out of Leicester.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, they produce some really amazing football books. Again, all sort of about, retro memorabilia, great stories.
Yeah.
So I'd highly recommend people look at the Conquer website and just check out the range they've got.
Yeah. There you go. Shout out for you guys.
Yeah.
So what are you doing now?
I've worked at the BBC for over 20 years in a couple of spells. I make documentaries for BBC News, and I also produce content for the BBC Sport website, mainly outside of the UK. So I've had a lot of fun doing that over the years, working not just in football, but Formula One, tennis, golf.
Wow.
Covering a couple of World Cups.
Wow. Isn't that funny that when I think back to what you shared with us today about that childhood moment of, oh, what's that? What's that FA Cup thing on the telly? Now you're in that world. There must be people. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I have.
There must be people, youngsters, going, oh, look at that tennis match, that F1. Look at it. Yeah,
absolutely.
Does that feel?
It feels more than I ever could have hoped to have.
I love it.
Dreamed of to be involved in, because I think probably naively back then, you see, whoever's Des Lynam's presenting, you think that's kind of it. You don't see what's going on behind the scenes.
You don't.
You don't understand the production side of it. The cameras, the vision mixers, all the directors, all that kind of thing I didn't know about that back then. So I probably didn't think there was a job for me unless I was the presenter, and I knew I didn't have that confidence to be a presenter. So it took me a long time to really understand the way that the media works in that sense. And there are hundreds of jobs and roles to be able to do. And that took me a while. So my very first job at the BBC was a tape archivist in the sport library. So I was literally just watching football matches and logging close-ups of Alan Shearer and producing stuff for Football Focus and, relatively low-level stuff. But then it's led to an amazing life and career, which I've really enjoyed.
I can't imagine how interesting that is. What do you think is your proudest moment or experience? Not just related to the book necessarily, but perhaps in this journey of life to where it's got you right now. Maybe it is something to do with the book. Maybe it is something with your father. I don't know. I don't know the answer because only you know the answer.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. One thing that's come to mind is learning from mistakes. I think I'm proud of the fact that I have been able to learn throughout my life and sort of become a better person because of it and not make the same mistake twice. And I think that's something that my dad always said to me. And he said, things will hold you back because you're not willing to fail. You're not willing to push yourself out there and fail. And he did say that to me several times. And it kind of hurt to hear that, but he was right. You've got to take risks in life. You've got to push yourself. You've got to try and create your own sort of niche if you want to be successful. And
I heard something recently about failure, which is there is no such thing as failure. It's just that you're just not ready. And if we think about that a little bit longer, it does make sense, doesn't it? Because I'm sure we can all relate as we listen to this and say, oh yeah, I didn't pass that exam. I didn't pass my driving test. I didn't, whatever it might be, that relationship didn't work out. I didn't get that job. But actually, if I'm honest with myself, I wasn't ready. So I didn't actually fail.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. Yes, it does. And there's a time when, I've been ready a bit later than other people in life.
Well, this is another thing, isn't it?
Hence writing a book at 50 when other people have probably done it at 30. But that's fine. I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Well, again, to relating it to sport, some people excel at different times in their life. Some academics are not ready through a schooling system, for example. I'm not slating schooling system. I'm just saying, for an example, that they're not quite ready for that exam because they're not there yet. Yet later in life, they are able to do things which are remarkable because they're ready for it. So that's a good point you make there.
Yeah.
perhaps at times you just weren't ready.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
Life's good now. What's important to you? What's in Giles Goford's world right now? What's important to you?
The most important thing is that my family are happy and healthy and doing things that we want to be doing. And I think, I lost my father, my wife lost her mother.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And that does obviously put things in massive perspective.
It certainly does.
And even though we were doing this beforehand, it really made us realize, my wife and I, that we wanted to, if we wanted to do something, we would do it. We wouldn't wait. We would do it. And, we have to be realistic, with time and money, obviously. Can't do everything we want to do.
We're just going to travel the world for a year.
No, absolutely. But we've tried to enjoy our lives and
you embrace the moment.
Carpe diem, as they say, and make sure that we're happy, but with a sort of caveat of being sensible at the same time. So, just happiness and
Giles, I've met you here today. I've met you outside of here today. I've seen you doing what I would call public speaking, right? In front of an audience on a stage. I'm intrigued to ask you this because we mentioned about your shyness as a child. Yeah. Would you still consider yourself a little bit introverted? Because I see a very, very confident guy in front of me.
Oh no, definitely am a little bit. There's certainly a few percentage of me is thinking, why would anyone want to hear from me?
Is it? So that imposter syndrome, but that's not the same thing as introvert and shyness, is it?
No. I think I'm just seizing the opportunities that life has luckily thrown my way, and whether that's through my sort of initiative or hard work, or whether it's just through fortune, I'll take it. And I think maybe making up for a bit of lost time. I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something. I did work experience at a newspaper in the late 80s, around the time I was writing the book. I thought this would be great. Journalism, brilliant. When I got there, nobody really helped me because they had their own work to do. Fine.
Sure.
I was terrified, right? And I had one job to do one day, and it was to ring around the netball teams of Buckinghamshire and find out their results to put in the paper.
Right.
One would think that's a relatively simple job to do. Terrified. Couldn't do it. I couldn't even ring the captain of the Buckinghamshire All-Stars and find out what I couldn't do it. And I froze.
Did you?
Yeah. And thinking, I was 15. I was thinking, come on. And that's kept with me ever since. And I've sort of challenged myself to go, what? Well, why did you freeze? I was terrified, I guess, of what that person would come back and say to me.
You were imagining what the
worst situation.
Yeah.
I'd get. I don't know what the worst situation. And actually, no, put yourself in that situation. What is the worst that can happen? And then get over it and get on with it. So I think that's something that, that we've tried to instill in our kids from a very young age is just go out and try things. Fail if you like, that's absolutely fine. But at least try. And I think I'm making up for lost time for some things I wasn't willing to try back then.
I love that. And I think there's another piece to that, isn't there? It's never too late.
No, absolutely.
It really is never too late.
No.
If you've got something that you want to do, that you've dreamt of doing, that for whatever reason you've held back, it could be circumstance, finance, whatever it might be. I know it's a cliched thing to say, Nike say, just do it. But C.S. Lewis wrote, didn't he, about it's never, I can't remember, I'm going to paraphrase here, but basically it's never too late to be the person you want to be or to fulfill the dream you want to fulfill. Never too late.
And you don't want to have those regrets when you can't do them. As you say, the famous sort of deathbed regrets. And,
there's lots of them, isn't there? How can people find your book? And also how can people, if they wanted to approach you for public speaking or anything else, is there an easier way to find you? And so the book and you?
The book, it's called Head for the Floodlights. It's available on the Conquer Editions website. It's also on Amazon, but I would definitely look at the Conquer website because there's a whole range of interesting books there. And I've been really pleased with the way it's been received. It's quite niche, as we've talked about, but I've had some lovely reaction from people both who I know and also people I've never met before who've emailed me or got in touch and go, yeah, this really meant something to me, and it's rekindled something between maybe a dad and a son, which has been a lovely thing to hear. So I'm on Instagram, Facebook. Just if you search Giles Goford, which is Goford, and I only mention that because my dad always had this sort of famous thing he always used to say to us, going, "We're the only Goford family in the world. There's no other family with this surname." And actually, I think he's pretty much right.
Is he right?
Yeah,
Really?
it's a unique surname.
There you go.
And I was quite proud of that.
Yeah, you should be.
We've done research into it, and we can't find any other family with that name.
There you go.
So I should be findable.
Well, I've enjoyed learning more and understanding the background to the book, and also your thing there, your life story. I think it's been very, very interesting. Is there any closing gambit, pearl of wisdom, anecdotes that you'd like to share with us?
The one thing, again, my wife and I say, if the sun's shining, go out and enjoy it, and if it's raining, just go out and enjoy it and get wet. Because you've got to face both the whatever life throws at you, good and bad. Don't stay inside because it's raining. Go for that walk or go and do whatever you want to do. Yeah. So that's one of our phrases that we kind of live by. And again, I think if there's something burning inside of you that you really want to achieve, and mine was literally taking a photo of an album of old photos from a loft and thinking, would people be interested in this?
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's find out.
Yeah.
And I gave myself a bit of time to do that. That's really what I'm proud of, and being able to come here today and talk about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Giles. And thank you for listening, everybody. And I hope you've enjoyed So What's Your Story?